Yeah. Yeah. Srishti, can I start?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah. Professor Sarma, can I start?
Sure, sure.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Sarma, Srishti, Eeshan, Arpit, and others. Welcome to this online certificate course on EnviPol and Global Policy Insights, Climate Governance, and Global Commons. In fact, it all started when Arunima wrote to me, and she no longer is associated with Global Policy Insights these days. Now, Srishti has taken over, and then it started with this. Then I requested our head of the department, Professor Sukanya Sarma. She was very much eager to help us out in this endeavor. And then I requested Professor Namjahao Kipgen. Then all of us, this is the collective effort, which you can see from the number of students that who have registered. I think it will exceed 200 at least. Now it is 160 plus or so. And you see, in this online certificate workshop, there are two topics which are going to be covered. One, climate governance, policy paradigms to strengthen SDG 13 climate action, one, and the game theory and systems thinking for global commons. And there are two speakers. One, it will start with Mr. Eeshan Chaturvedi, and then Mr. Arpit Chaturvedi will also speak after in the second session. We have divided the workshop in two sessions, 2 to 4, and then 4:30 to 6:30, 4 to 4:30. We can take a break. And if you look at, Eeshan Chaturvedi is the founder of EnviPol and the assistant dean of Jindal School of Environment and Sustainability. He is an environmental and energy lawyer and had completed his LLM in environmental law and policy from Stanford Law School in June 2015. After graduating in Bachelor of Business Administration and Bachelor of Laws, he served as a judicial clerk in the Supreme Court of India. After this, he became the first judicial clerk appointed by the National Green Tribunal. With specific interest in environmental litigation and policy, he worked on environmental issues ranging from groundwater restoration, restructuring of highways and other infrastructure projects to sustainable development requirements in policy framework, international oil spill and like cases. And I hope Eeshan has already joined.
I'm here, Dr. Malik. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Arpit Chaturvedi, he is going to take the second session. Arpit Chaturvedi is the co-founder of CEO of Global Policy Insights. He's also a lecturer at the San Francisco State University, where he teaches comparative perspectives in public service to graduate students. A graduate of the Cornell Institute for Public Affairs, Arpit Chaturvedi holds an MPA degree with a focus on governance, politics, and policy studies. He was also the first non-US citizen to hold the position of the editor-in-chief of the Cornell Policy Review. He is the author of the book Our Egalitarian Universe and has been the editor of Not Without Her, Communal Harmony, a monograph printed by the National Foundation for Communal Harmony, Government of India, with essays from the top civil servants of the country. He has published articles in various prestigious journals on the themes of democracy, governance, systems thinking, game theory, history, and politics. Okay. Now I would like Professor Sukanya Sarma to welcome the speakers, the hosts, as well as all the more important participants of this workshop. Over to you, Professor Sarma.
Yes, very warm welcome to all of you. As Sambit said, most important are the participants. Yes, it is the participants who makes a program a success. And like if they're present, you are motivated, you are encouraged. I mean, the speakers and the organizers. And if participants are not there, they're less, we are depressed, and it makes, very difficult for the organizers, the speakers, to actually deliver what their, main objective is. So yes, very good participation. And as Dr. Malik just gave the introduction of the organization and also the speakers who will be presenting or running the workshop, basically a very important topic, climate governance. And there is point number 13 of the SDG goals, which is sort of around the world, is being discussed in different platforms across disciplines, in political science, in economics, and sociology, in anthropology. And everywhere there seems to be paradigms which have generated questioning about people's way of lives, questioning behavior, questioning ideas which are pertinent or considered to be birthright, the use of technology, the use of resources. Now, in that perspective, a workshop like this it holds immense importance for a department like ours, where we are 11 disciplines of humanities and social sciences coming together. And it is all the time a very multidisciplinary environment in which we talk, in which we discuss. And there we have faculty members and students who do research on policy framework, on development of policies, but where we have focused areas, and climate research is one of them. So it's also, as Sambit said, that when he came to me with this particular, proposal to have this workshop, it was a very, very, what is called welcoming. And thanks, to the organization, warm welcome to Shristi, to Professor Eeshan Chaturvedi, to the other speakers, where we makes a sort of an activity for the department, which is a requirement of the day. So that is something that we would very much like to participate in the in the global sort of platform, where these type of thoughts and ideas need to be discussed, need to be deliberated. And good to see these participants. Just now we are 183, so I assume out of this, we have almost 160 participants, maybe, if we minus the organizers and the guests who are part of us. So yes, Sambit, I'm also grateful to you. Yes, Dr. Kibin, I'm also very grateful to you for taking this up. And to both to all of you, Shristi, Professor Eeshan Chaturvedi, and also to Mr. Sambit. I'm sorry, your
Professor Arpit Chaturvedi.
Arpit Chaturvedi, for coming and giving us your valuable time and helping us to sort of build up on our research, on our ongoing research in this area. Thank you very much, and would like to say that whenever the world turns better, please do visit us. It would be nice to meet and sit across the table over a cup of coffee and discuss similar things. Welcome to you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Sarma, for very encouraging deliberations. Now, I would like all participants to switch on the video to the greatest extent possible, so that some kind of interaction may take place. I'm just taking some kind of a liberty from the speakers, that you can disturb the speakers anytime you feel like. Don't wait till the end of it. And I would be glad that if the speakers will be disturbed all the time. Okay. Because what you say, what people say, disturb, I always feel that it is some kind of a culture of interrogation, culture of questioning. Okay, and human species have thrived only because of our capacity to question, capacity to interrogate. Okay, with this remark, I would like Professor Eeshan Chaturvedi to deliver his lecture. Over to you, Professor Chaturvedi.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Malik, Dr. Sharma, Dr. Kirpan. It's been a pleasure. I also want to, before I start the session, I want to specify, just towing Dr. Malik's line, that while it is being touted as a workshop, 2 lectures in 1 workshop, I want all of you to feel that this is a discussion that I'm having with all of you. And I want all of you to feel that I'm sitting across the table and having a discussion with you about things that I read about and I learn about and teach generally as well. So please, again, to reiterate what Dr. Malik just said, please feel free to ask questions, critique, challenge, make observations, whatever you may have at your disposal. I also want to point out 2 things that are of utmost importance, and you'll see this in my slides as well. But what attracted us, and we do this as GPODs, the co-organizer of this workshop, we do this across universities. But the reason why we specifically reached out to Dr. Malik and Dr. Sharma at some point was because of the interdisciplinarity of your department. It's a very unique department across the country, which has so many different disciplines working towards common aims. And that's the sort of the burning flame of the GPODs fellowship that we represent as well, which is where different people from different cultures, different professional backgrounds, academic backgrounds come and learn new things. Now, at any point in time during the session, if you have any questions, just to reiterate, please feel free to unmute yourself. If you have your videos on, that's always helpful because I get bored of looking at my own face. But if you are shy, please feel free to put in your questions in the chat box as well. And I assure you, I'll take those up as well. I know that Dr. Malik was very kind with this introduction of me, but I'll quickly give you a 101 of Professor Eeshan Chaturvedi so that you have some context and you do not ask me hardcore science questions. That's really not my discipline. I know that I'm sitting amongst ducks and I'm a pigeon here, but science is not really my expertise. But so I started out as a lawyer, and if you hold a rank in your graduate school of law, you get this wonderful experience you can apply for, which is a judicial clerkship. So you can be associated with a Supreme Court judge, assist them with everything that they do. And that was an eye-opening experience for me. But not many of you would know this, but Supreme Court has benches that the Chief Justice of India organizes. So there'll be a cyber law bench, there'll be an arbitration bench, there'll be a criminal bench, there'll be a family bench. Now, the judge I was associated with was with the environmental bench, or as it's called, the forest bench of the country. So in my 2 years of working there, day in and day out, I used to read 150, 200, 250 briefs every day on environmental matters. Until then, I wasn't really sure if environment is really my calling. But through that grind, I realized that what really is environment is beyond law, and what law tries to understand environment as is sort of lacking the philosophy, lacking the science, and lacking the policy elements of what we are served as lawyers. So from there on, I became, I was associated with the NGT, National Green Tribunal. I went on to do my master's. I worked with the United Nations in Geneva in New York for a bit. And then I came back to India and I started this venture, EnviPol and the GPODs Fellowship, and the rest, as they say, is history. But one thing that we do in these workshops across the globe, and we do these workshops for international universities and national universities and universities of high repute, such as yourself. One thing we wish to make clear is that there is a significant amount of interdisciplinarity in management, in law, in policy, in science that happens on an everyday basis, especially when it comes to climate. And that is why you'll see that I haven't used the term climate action in any of my slides. And that is primarily because I want to break that concept down for all of you and then start and then start explaining what it really means to have different aspects interact with each other. So that's my introductory rant about what I'm going to be discussing. I assure you that this would not run for more than 100 minutes of a session, and that is only going to be 100 minutes if I have enough interaction. Otherwise, it'll be still shorter, and you'll have an ample break before the next session starts. So with that being said, let's move on to what we are discussing today. As I mentioned, I haven't put climate action as a term because a lot of us are confused about what climate action really is. So I have simplified it and called this session Economics of Environmental Management. Now, if you're a keen observer, you would have understood that I have made it very generic. It isn't very specific, the topic. That's because I'm going to be covering a lot of things during the session. And I want you to have the bird's eye view of all that we will be covering through this topic. Before we begin with the topic of discussion, I have a couple of suggestions. One thing is, and Dr. Malik has already helped me here, please do interact, please do interrupt if you have to, raise questions, comments, ideate, critique if you have to, challenge if you have to. And it'll be very helpful if you have your videos on while you do that. I also say this from a different perspective. At the GPARTS Fellowship, what we nurture is networking. And when you ask a question in a class, when you ask a question in a session like this, in a workshop, the person delivering that session also recognizes you. So that paves way for further networking. They remember you, they cherish your question, and they'll always, that's the networking aspect that's happening right there. So those are the two suggestions, so interaction and videos. The second is a rule, and it's a rule that runs throughout this workshop. Please make sure that you consider this a safe space. So if you have a question that's politically relevant, that's relevant otherwise, please do ask it. As long as you're not hurtful towards anyone else, please feel free that this is a safe space and we can all discuss our views. As Dr. Malik already mentioned and Dr. Sharma mentioned, we would encourage all the opinions to come through. And Bentham had said that clash of ideas leads to new ideas. So that's always helpful. Now, a couple of disclaimers before I go ahead. I have 3 disclaimers on my slide. Before disclaimer, I'm a little too shy to admit over a written slide, so I'll just mention it verbally to you. The first disclaimer is that, as I said, I'm not going to be talking about climate action in the slides. I'm going to be breaking each concept down, and we're going to start from ground zero. So I'm not presuming your knowledge of environmental policy or law or management or economics. I'm absolutely starting at ground zero. So if you are not a sustainability professional or academic, that's absolutely okay. I'm going to take care of that. The second thing is that I am a lawyer by qualification, so these are my views. These are not the views of any of the institutions I represent in my professional capacity or personal capacity. And the third thing is, the third written thing is that because we're covering such a wide array of topics today, I'm going to be taking up big bits and pieces of different concepts and putting them all together and hoping that all of that makes sense to you and you enjoy the session while we go ahead. The fourth disclaimer that I haven't written on my slides is that in my free time, I am an absolute astrophysics nerd. So throughout my session, you'll see a lot of references to astrophysics. I do not deem any knowledge of astrophysics per se. I just read a lot on astrophysics and that's about it. So if you have any astrophysics specific questions, please do not ask me. I'm certainly no expert there. One thing is that I just want to clarify, this is a certificate workshop, so it'll be helpful if you attend both the sessions. That's when your certificate will be available to you. If you attend one session and do not attend the other, it'll be difficult to issue certificates. So please make sure that you're here at 4:30 p.m. again for the next session. All right. So the last thing I mentioned before this certificate bit was that I am an astrophysics nerd. Let's start there. Has anyone heard of Carl Sagan? If you could just raise your hands. All right, Khushi has heard of Carl Sagan. Anyone else? Vishal has heard of Carl Sagan. All right, quite a few of us have heard of Carl Sagan. All right. So Carl Sagan was a cosmologist, astrophysicist. He liked to call himself a science educator. He was on NPR and TV and everywhere, and he used to bring science to everyone's drawing rooms, and he used to break down incredibly complicated scientific concepts for the general public, such as myself, who do not have any backing in science. I would like to start with his quote, and that explains why I'm handling climate action the way I am. So Carl Sagan had a very famous quote. I'm sure some of you have heard of it. He said, if you wish to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. Now, what was he trying to say? He was saying that if someone asks you to make an apple pie from scratch, what you'll do is you'll plant an apple tree, right? But to have the seed, you'll have to first go into the biochemistry of it. You'll have to look at the soil. You'll have to invent the soil, so on and so forth, and backtrack it. And you'll have to reinvent the universe. You'll have to go back all the way to Big Bang. Now, a lot of the times, especially over the last decade or so in my interactions with students and academics and professionals, I've realized that a lot of people want to jump into the climate bandwagon, right? I want to be a climate finance professional, and I want to be a climate policy professional, and I want to be emissions trading certificate holder, issuing agency, accredited agency, so on and so forth, energy entrepreneur, so on and so forth. A lot of the times there's a gap between what's cool, and the need of the hour, to be honest, which is learning more about climate and taking it as a vocation, as a profession. But a lot of the times what is missing is the basic element of climate finance, or basic element of environmental policy, environmental law, environmental management, ecological economics, so on and so forth. So if we need to, at some point, understand what climate action is, understand what conservation is, understand what happened at COP26 and why was it a failure or success, depending on where you stand in your philosophical views, you need to first invent that climate universe, that environmental universe. And according to me, to invent the environmental universe, you need to start at the very basic level. And that is to be able to understand environment, the term, the suffixes of which give us environmental policy, law, management, finance, so on and so forth. So I briefly mentioned that after my stint with Stanford University, I was working with the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe in Geneva, where I took up a personal project. What I did was I went through the legal definition of the term environment across 17 countries, both civil law and common law. I'm not getting into the details of what civil law and common law are, but I went through the legal definition of the term environment as was in the statutes or judicial decisions of about 17 countries. And I came up with this list that's on your screen. Now, be warned that I'm going to be asking a lot of questions throughout this to encourage interaction. None of the questions require the right answer, right? So as long as you have a guess, you have an answer, please do speak up. I do not expect you to know the answer. These are things that I worked on for a lot of my life. So I do not expect you to just be able to guess the right answer. But if you do, or if you know the right answer, please do participate. So as I was saying, one second. Yeah, as I was saying, I went through the legal definition of the term environment across 7 countries. And what I did was I made a list of the most prominent terms used within these definitions. So, how a definition usually reads, it reads the term in legal definition. The term environment includes human beings, water, air, land, other living creatures. So I included on this slide and in my research the 10, 11 most prominent terms used to define environment globally. So let's have a look at those terms. Environment most prominently includes, across all definitions, includes human beings. It includes water, air, land, other living creatures, plants, microorganism, property, and their interrelationship. So right off the bat, we have human beings, water, air, land, other living creatures, plants, microorganism, property. These 8 terms that are the most prominent terms used to define environment. And if you look at the Environment Protection Act of India, the 1986 Act, and if you look at the environment definition, it is exactly this. It has a couple of other terms, but it defines environment to include human beings, water, air, land, other living creatures, plant, microorganism, property, and their interrelationship amongst each other. Now, the outcome of this workshop is for you to be able to challenge everything that is thrown at you within the environmental domain or within the climate change domain, right? And understand climate action better. So my first question to you is, if you look at these terms, human beings, water, air, land, other living creatures, plants, microorganism, property, is there any commonality that you find amongst them? Thing that you find missing from the most basic elements that are considered the most basic elements of environment? Any commonalities amongst these 8 indicators, factors of environment, or anything drastically missing from these, from the definition? You could write it on the chat, but I'd prefer it if you speak up, because otherwise I'll have to keep checking the chat box. So within the elements of the legally accepted definition of environment, the elements that are listed on your screen, is there a commonality? All right. Very interesting. Rohit says a proper management. Very interesting, because sometimes people do not have a systems view of how this definition works. So that's an excellent point. Monish said, again, interdependency for coexistence. Again, a very important point. Sometimes it's all of these factors are looked at in silos. And Vishal has actually a bit of what we call a systems critical thinking mind, where he's saying that governance of all of this is missing. All right. Ishwari says human collectivities like society, community element is missing. So, all right. So human beings are looked at just for that element of theirs. They're not seen as congregations. And for those of us who've enjoyed political science know that human behavior in congregations is different from human behavior otherwise. So we have a few guesses. We'll wait for about 30 seconds. If anyone has any other ideas on what could be the commonalities and what's missing from these definitions. So to give you an example, someone in one of these lectures mentioned that noise as a part of environment is missing, or energy as a part of environment is missing. Those are some of the things that are starkly missing from the definition. Any other ideas? What could be missing from the definition of environment? All right. So sun is missing. Abhishek is right. Actually, Abhishek, that's a point that I'll come to in a bit. That's an extremely impressive point to make. Death is missing. So the cyclical approach of living beings is missing. Interdependence, again, Srividya is sort of echoing what Monish had earlier said, that it's one of the commonalities. It could also be seen as missing, because these could be treated as factors that are siloed in their approach. So I'll tell you what I was looking for and what I want to explain to you going forward. And again, I'll tell you this from an anecdote from my life as to how I stumbled upon this answer. Before that, please do remember that the whole point of this session is to make you challenge everything that's given to you. Again, Ayush, brilliant point, because valuation of life is something that I'm going to be covering in this session under the economics tab of the session. So thank you for bringing it up, and integrity of all elements Krishna mentions again. So I'll tell you a story. I was in 2019 November, I was in London, and London has a daily called The Sun. And I was sifting through the daily, and I came across a news report. This was the news report in The Sun. And basically the news said that there's a golden asteroid, which is supposed to contain metals worth 8,000 quadrillion pounds, metals including gold, platinum, iron, nickel, you know, truly a treasure hunt of a fairy tale of an asteroid going around. And the asteroid was named Psyche 16. And in the news, it was mentioned, as it is mentioned in this graphical representation of the news piece, that SpaceX and NASA are planning to launch a visit to Psyche 16 this year. So earlier, this I'd read about 3 years back. Now, there were also murmurs that at some point, exploration, quote unquote, or mining exploration of this Psyche 16 might also be undertaken. I asked myself, if you were to mine a gold, platinum, iron, nickel, any other metal mine on our planet, you'd have certain environmental laws, and you'll have certain mining laws, and you'll have a mining policy, and you have a minor mineral policy and a major mineral policy, and you'll have statutes, and you'll have policies, and you'll have exports, imports, and you'll have international relations related to those exports, imports, and that decides what your GDP is going to be, and that decides what your interdependence or independence in terms of sovereignty as a country is going to be, because you'll have so much revenue from those mines and so on and so forth. What are the considerations when they will mine Psyche 16? Will there be a law that will bind them? Will they have to give an environment impact assessment report when they mine this asteroid? Will there be any regulation as to the rehabilitation of the asteroid? Will there be any regulation with regard to the waste that is generated in terms of space debris or otherwise? So those were the questions that I asked myself. And to all those questions, the answer, I'm sure you can guess now, was a resounding no. There's no EIA that will be done. Our space laws at this point are still under development, to say the least, and we do not have space laws that cover mining and exploration the way we could have imagined this playing out. And if none of these laws or policies or statutes or regulations or management schemes or investment banking financing schemes cover this exploration, then why is that? And that's a question that should stay with you throughout your environmental or climate related field of study. Why is it that I'm learning this, or why is it that I'm being told that this is the right bit? Because that's what I'm going to come to in the next slide. So the reason why we do not have an EIA or a mining policy, a mining law that governs Psyche 16 is because mining environment does not cover anything that is beyond what you need, what I need. Meaning, the legal definition of environment is cruxed on the first term here, So if you think about it, and all of you had wonderful and, to be honest, more in-depth answers to my question earlier. But what's really missing is a non-human being element of environment. So what is environment? Let's relook at the definition. It says the legally accepted definition in India and otherwise includes human beings, water, air, land, other living creatures, plants, microorganism, property. What out of all of these things, what are the things that are not required for human being sustenance? Water, can we survive without it? You and I, we can't. Air, we can't. Land, we can't. Other living creatures, we can't. Plants, we can't. Microorganism, we can't. And I'm talking of, bacteria and viruses and all the awful things that are happening around us. Property, we can't. And we'll leave property aside. That's a larger concept that I hope you look up GPOT's fellowship and we'll discuss in the fellowship. If everything is human-centric, then it makes sense that something that is beyond our perception of necessity for our survival is not included in the legal definition. So is Psyche 16, the golden asteroid, required for our survival? No. Is the sun required for our immediate survival? Like, is it something that we need to take care of and maintain its brightness and heat and so on and so forth? We don't. Similarly, everything in space beyond our atmosphere, do we require it outside of food and water and air and land? The answer is no. So what comes through is environment. What you should challenge in the first place is environment is being defined as things that are required by you and me to sustain ourselves. And that, I argue in my writings, in my publications, in this lecture, is the wrong view of the term environment. That's why I said, if you want to if you want to make an apple pie from scratch, you need to first invent the universe. Let's reinvent environment. Let's see why it is not serving the purposes, why we are not serving environmental purposes. It is because we are defining it according to your need and my need, but not the need of the environment itself. And that goes into social ethics of environment, and I'll come to it in a bit. As I said, I want to give you a potpourri of different subjects during this session. So that's one aspect. Now, some of you who are extremely practical and have sort of like a Machiavellian sort of an attitude might argue that, listen, what is wrong with defining environment according to human beings? Like, what is wrong with having air, water, land, property, microorganism, plants, other living creatures, all required for your sustenance and mine, when we are the ones defining it? If it were a tree defining the environment, it would have defined the environment according to itself. And if it were a fish defining an environment, it would have defined the environment itself. And it is the human beings defining the environment. So they've included everything that is for their immediate sustenance. And that's where I want to ask you a few questions to draw a line. And given the audience that we have, I'm sure that we'll come up with some answers to these. I don't know why I've done this, but to make it easier for you, I've put a periodic table in front of you. I'm sure you would not require this. So my first question is, which are the 5 most common elements in the universe? So not just Earth, all of space and non-space and everything. Which are the 5 most common elements in the universe? You could say that on chat, but again, I'd prefer it if you could say that out loud so that I don't have to follow the chat. 5 most common elements according to you in the universe. Hydrogen, helium, absolutely.
Hydrogen, helium, carbon, iron.
Okay.
Hydrogen, helium,
Gold,
carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen.
All right. applauses to Prachi. She's listed all of them absolutely in the right order as well. Surya, we do not have iron as one of the most prominent elements. It's a close 6th, 7th, but not in the 5 most common abundant elements. So Prachi has it right. So has Tasmita, as I see it on my chat screen. So let me recount it. I'm just reading out Tasmita's answer because that's absolutely right. 5 most common elements in the universe: hydrogen, helium, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen. Okay. Now let's keep all of that information aside and also keep aside helium. It's an inert gas, it does not react. And plus there are way too many jokes on helium, so I'm not recounting on that. I have another question for you. If I were to ask you which are the 4 most prominent elements, abundant elements that human bodies are made up of, what would they be? So we have
oxygen, carbon, nitrogen.
All right. Srividya, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen.
Iron.
Himanshu says calcium, but that's not one. That's a common mistake. Srividya, did you say hydrogen as well?
Iron, I said iron.
It's not
hydrogen
iron.
Also.
All right. So I don't know who's joining in from ASUS, but it is hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen in that order. So you've got it absolutely right. Again, Ayush has got it right as well. 5 most common elements in the universe: hydrogen, helium, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen. 4 most, and we're keeping helium aside, 4 most common elements that human beings are made of: hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen. Now, you might think that human beings are very special, and that's why they should be able to define everything according to themselves, and environment should be defined as per the requirements and needs of sustenance of human beings. But the fact of the matter is that human beings are actually a byproduct, a chanced byproduct of what happened, 600 million years ago, or what, 13 billion years ago, whatever. For us to understand that we are but a figment of the universe requires us to shed the arrogance that comes from being a human being, comes from being the all-important species on the planet. We haven't really thought about it. We are actually, we talk of equity and equality in policy and law and colleges and academic offices and workplaces. But if you think about it, you're one of millions of species on this planet, but you are ruling the roost. And sometimes it's nice to shed the hubris and think of yourselves as just stardust floating around in the universe, a by chance coincidence that happened in terms of our planet. And that's what gave rise to us after, generations and millions of years of evolution and so on and so forth. So when you shed that hubris, you'll realize that it's probably not okay to define all of the environment, things that have preceded us, things that will survive us on this time scale, this planet on its time scale, need not be defined only for our sustenance of our persistence as a life form. So that's point 1. But if I had to take this step further, and if I were to ask you this question, say this is a football field, right? Internationally sized football field. And the x-axis of the football field is the timeline of our universe. So from Big Bang on 00 till today here. When do you think human beings came into existence? If this is the timeline of the universe, this is Big Bang, 00, and this is today. On the scale
Very
of...
last part. The
All right.
very last part. The smallest part thinkable.
All right. Surya says smallest part thinkable on the extreme right corner, very last part. Any other guesses? So midline, near goalpost, Rohan says. There's a penalty box on both the sides. There's midline, there's the D as it's called. Any other guesses? Surya says the very last part. Rohan
In
says
right D.
in the right D. Okay, Akash says in the right D.
Say the goal post.
Okay, Virat says at the goal post. I'm assuming Rohan and Virat are both referring to the right goal post, right? Not the one next to Big Bang.
Yeah.
All right. Any other guesses? When do you think we came into being? Right goal post. I would request Asus to change his name to whatever his name is. I'm assuming this is the name of his laptop or her laptop. Center line. Thank you, Tarakesh. Tarakesh says center line. Himanshu Shekhar says halfway line. Thank you. Anyone else? So up till now, we have the goal post. We have the D. We have the center line. Penalty spot. Okay. Around right final third. Okay. Adhirat says. Understood. All right. I'm going to give it another 15 seconds if there are any guesses. So if this x-axis is the timeline of the universe from Big Bang till today, when do you think human beings came into existence? Okay. So, surprise, surprise. If this football field is that timeline, then human beings came into existence equivalent on the extreme right, as Surya says, equivalent to the thickness of the last blade of grass. That's when we came into existence. So at the absolute edge of the football field. Now this puts things in perspective. One, I'm not saying equivalent to the width of the last blade of grass. That's not how long we have been in existence. The commonly understood average width of a blade of grass is 1/16 of an inch. I'm talking about the thickness of the blade of grass. That's how long we've been in existence on this timeline of the universe. The second thing it puts into perspective is that is how insignificantly recent we are on this timeline of the universe. So let's go back to the point that we're making. Why define environment only according to the factors that are necessary for survival of you and I, when we have been insignificantly present on this time scale of the universe? Should we look beyond our generally understood definitions of environment for it to include space and noise and radiation and so many other things? To give you an example, I have once litigated in a case where radiation was not considered a part of environment. So all the radiation was happening from cell towers was not considered to be within the realm of environment. And that's because our definition of the term environment is very limited to things that you require for your survival. So the first thing I ask you to do in this attempt for you to challenge everything that's given to you is to shed the hubris about human beings and how it should be more holistic, our approach towards environment. Now, the second thing is, the obvious question is, why is this? And to answer this, let's go up till now. We've covered the history of environment. Now we're moving into the socio-ethics approaches of environment. And as I said, I'm going to give you a bunch of different aspects of environment and then make sense of climate action at the end. All of us are well aware of this approach. But the reason why environment is defined only to include things that are necessary for you and me is because human beings have and not today, not just you, generationally, since time immemorial, human beings have had an anthropocentric approach towards everything, especially towards environment. Now, you ask, what is anthropocentric? Anthro is human, human-like, humanoid. Centric is... Sorry, Suja?
That means human-centric approach. Everything we are thinking
Exactly.
and human beings are the center.
Absolutely. So anthropocentric, as Suja says, anthro means human, human-like, humanoid. Centric means centric. So humans are at the center of it all. Everything else is for your exploitation and use. Everything else is a resource for you. And that's anthropocentric approach. Now, guys, I want to take a step back here and remind you the point of this session. I want to tell all of you how history and social ethics and law and economics and management, how all of that interrelates into one big cluster and gives you the term environment. And that's why I'm taking you through this journey of various aspects of environmental studies generally, but climate action more specifically. So I think all of us would have a basic understanding of what anthropocentrism is. So I'll devote 60 seconds to your thoughts on whether meat eating is anthropocentric or not. So we understand that anthropocentrism is human beings are at the center of it all, and everything else apart from the human species is for our utilization, exploitation, resource generation, so on and so forth. If you're doing that definition, then would meat eating account to anthropocentrism? Would that amount to anthropocentrism? Any thoughts? Do you think that
I think no,
Yeah.
because it
Okay.
is a survival thing. Lions will eat deers. So it's a survival thing. I won't say that it is anthropocentric. However, defining some phenomenon with the point of reference stuck on me will be anthropocentric.
Okay, actually, that's a very good point. So it's the function through which you're defining that phenomena. We have a couple of answers. Tashmita says yes. Kajal says yes. Iswari says factually yes, which is the answer that I was looking for. All right. So Aditya actually makes a very good point. And I'd like all of you to refer to that comment in the chat box. He says, considering the fact that we rear most of the animals we consume the most, perhaps not really. So he's saying that because one could argue that that animal came into existence for that purpose. It was reared to be fed, and hence it's not an anthropocentric approach. All right, I do not have an opinion.
I would say that that is the most anthropocentric answer. I would really say that. However, I would not argue. I'll just ask you to think about the thing that some life form is reared for. I mean, it is destined for my stomach. I would say that this is the most anthropocentric approach towards the environment.
Right, right. So, guys, the reason why I give this example for you guys to think about is because everyone has an opinion. Everyone is either a vegetarian or a non-vegetarian, depending on what your choices are. So we all have an opinion about this, and we all get to think about the topic of discussion. So this is by no means to put you in the spot and ask you to answer things that you do not want to answer, but the idea is just to get you to think about anthropocentrism as a concept. Now, as I said, I do not have any specific opinion on this, and even if I do, I'll save it for our later discussions, and I'll put my exactly, Virat has a valid point. So as I was saying, I'll put my email ID in the chat box, and we can have a larger discussion around this as we go ahead. But the larger point that I was trying to make is that there is a line of anthropocentrism in our heads that we all draw, right? So according to us, this is the boundary of anthropocentrism. This is beyond the boundary of anthropocentrism. And this is ecocentric, right? Ecocentric is where you consider environment as an equal to human beings. So I'll give you a little story. But before I give you that story, let me ask you a fun exercise. Let's do a fun exercise. If you had to guess the city, and I'm not saying the country, the city and the decade from which these pictures are taken, the city and the decade, what would your guesses be? I'm just trying to establish the point that we've always been anthropocentric, including what we've learned, the definition is very anthropocentric, human-centered. So if you had to guess the year or the decade in which these photos were clicked and the city in which these photos were clicked, what would your guesses be? I have put enough hints on your screen, including the fashion choices of the people on your screen, to give you a hint towards what decade and what city this is. There are clues in the photos themselves. All right, let's see the chat. So Tarakesh says London smog. LA is an answer. Paris is an answer. New York is an answer.
First, I'll say it's Delhi just before the pandemic.
Funny. Well done, Akash. It isn't. Okay. Mid-80s America. Karthik says LA. So we have 2 LA, a couple of New York as well. England. Chernobyl. No, it isn't Chernobyl. London. LA. All right, so we have 2 LAs now. And quite a few New Yorks, it seems. London. Paris was also a suggestion. And a lot of New Yorks again. And you'd be surprised how many times people misguess the answer to be New York. All right, so let me clarify. It is indeed Los Angeles. Any guesses as to which decade this is? So it is Los Angeles, it is LA. What decade is this? So guys who guessed LA, you were right. Ayush says 1920s, 30s. Rohit says 80s.
1950s.
All right, who's that? Sorry, I didn't catch the name.
This is Archita.
Archita, you're very close. It is actually the 60s, as some Ashish has guessed in the chat box. It is the 60s and 70s. So I'll give it to Naina and Ashish. So this is 1960s LA. Okay. Now, why am I talking about 1960s LA through photographs? Because I want all of you to understand a little about why we know about climate change and why we talk about climate change today. So whenever you talk to an environmental academic such as myself, you'd find that a lot of the times we refer to the golden age of environment, you know, the diamond age of environment, the most productive age of environment to be the 1970s. Okay. Now, if you can't make out from the screens, from your screens, 1960s LA was covered in impossible smog. You know, smog that is almost as bad as Delhi smog, as some of us joked. So 1960s LA was exactly this. And if any of you have been to LA recently, it's absolutely cleaned up, but this is how it used to be in the 60s. Now, going back, as I was saying, 1970s is seen as a decade of innovation for environment. You had catalytic converters, and the federal government of the United States came out with laws in which states could have their own standards, even more stringent than the ones put on the national level. There was the California Air Task Force that was set up, which is now California Air Regulatory Board, and so many policy and technological and so many other interventions happened in the 70s. In fact, if can I have quick digression and see if you could all raise, those of you who adhere to this could raise your hands. Any fans of the TV series Big Bang Theory? If you could just quickly raise your hands. All right, Deep was very quick. Anyone else? All right, quite a few of us. Right. So you know what I'm talking about when I'm telling you this, that Big Bang Theory, for those of you who are Big Bang Theory aficionados, the protagonist, Sheldon Cooper, has this recurring joke throughout the 10 seasons, 9 seasons, however long it was, where he keeps telling Penny that, Penny, your check engine light is on, right? Penny, your check engine light is on. And that's a recurring joke that happens throughout. Now, that joke wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for the golden age of environment. So while it became legally binding in the 1990s that you had to have a check engine light, and while it was invented in the 1930s, Detroit, the check engine light, in the 1970s, it became very commonplace to have check engine lights because people from California, people from LA were very conscious about the fact that if your engine is not working fine, you're polluting more. And we already have a smog issue. So let's not pollute more. Let's have a check engine light. Let's have a California Air Regulatory Board because we need to control the air pollution. Let's have higher standards. So if you look it up, California is the only state that follows CAFE standards, while the rest of the world is Euro 6 and BS6 and whatnot. And so many other advantages for electric vehicles. You get a different lane to drive in on expressways. So California took those steps, and those steps sort of snowballed into a larger movement on environment. In 1972 was the Stockholm Conference on Human Environment, where our then Prime Minister gave a very moving speech for about 40 minutes and so on and so forth. So somehow this one instance of LA smog changed everything, both in terms of policy interventions, legal interventions, technological interventions, and you could look it up on your own time. I do not have the time to go over all the interventions, but there were a lot of innovations and interventions that happened in the 1970s, all because people in LA started demanding more for their environment. The condition was so bad in LA that on a good day, people could not see beyond 5 meters or beyond 4 meters. On a bad day, apparently they could not see beyond the side of the other side of the bed. That is how bad the smog situation was. People were scared that their children will be born with eczema, emphysema, asthma, skin diseases, lung diseases, bronchitis, chronic bronchitis, bronchial disorder, acute bronchial disorder, so on and so forth, because the air pollution was so bad. They had to wear these masks every day. And 2 years earlier, when I delivered this lecture, people were gasping that they had to wear this mask. I know things have changed over the last 2 years, and we have sort of all made peace with wearing a mask, but you had to wear a mask 70 years earlier to step out, to be safe. And that's the situation of LA from 1960s. And that's why there was this human movement towards encouraging environmental disciplines, and both in academia and technology and policy and law, there were so many interventions that happened. So the golden age of environment, 1970s, so many things happened. But if you think about it, even the golden age of environment, which gave us so many brilliant inventions and running jokes and TV series and laws and policies and technology that became the mother technology of various other interventions that are coming in today. All of that golden age of environment, for the betterment of environment, was pivoted on human beings fearing for their health, for their lives, for the health of their children. It wasn't because people one day stood up and said that, no, we should care for the environment itself. We should care for our water and we should care for the land and air and plants and other living creatures. No, it was because they wanted to care for themselves and they had to wear these masks and they could barely breathe and they were contracting diseases and their children were being born ill and sick. And hence they brought upon us this golden age of environment. So my point is, even the most prominent, celebrated, policy-wise, law-wise, internationally, international relations-wise, diplomacy-wise, sustainability-wise, innovation-wise, the most celebrated age of humanity for environment came from an anthropocentric cause of fearing for your health, your children's health, so on and so forth. So that's how ingrained anthropocentrism is. And let me clarify here. We are still all very anthropocentric. Now you might think that you're vegan and you don't litter and you don't use plastic straws and you care for olive ridley turtles. But the fact of the matter is that you and your carbon footprint today is more than the cumulative carbon footprint of all of your ancestors put together, in all probability, mostly. So just because you segregate your waste or drive an electric car or take the bicycle does not mean that you're not anthropocentric. That's how the society has been developed, and we'll get into that structure in a bit. But my point is that even the most celebrated age of environment has been due to anthropocentric reasons. The question I have actually for all of you is, let me first set the stage for the question. So let's say that this catalytic converter, that is exhaust pipes that need to be installed in cars now with the catalytic converter, electrolytic converter, I'm not sure what it is. They have to be installed with these converters in the car, and they now have to install the check engine lights, and now they have to take 10 compliances and permissions to set up a polluting industry. Or if they were running a polluting industry, they have to take consent of the pollution control board or the state government or whoever. All of these interventions, policy, law, technology, international relations, they come with a cost. Right? Now, this person wakes up one day on your screen, the one wearing this mask, and he realizes that his factory now needs to apply for 10 permissions, and if he does not meet the standards, he'll be shut down. So he has to, say, hypothetically speaking, install airbag filters and compliance mechanisms and online monitoring and so on and so forth. Say he spends $10,000 on that. And then he's driving to his office and he's stopped by the cop and he's told that you do not have a catalytic converter or a check engine light. Your fine is another $500, so on and so forth. So this guy, little by little, incurs costs to be up to date with these policy, law, management, finance interventions that have happened to better the environment. So if that's the point, and if each generation that instills change for the betterment of environment has to pay a cost, the question is, this generation paid the cost for cleanup of the LA situation here, but were they sole contributors of the LA situation here? As I explained, that these people had to pay for compliances and converters and setting up government functionaries and authorities and departments for cleanup of air and water and pollution generally, they had to pay a cost, but did they contribute solely for this pollution? And the answer is no, as Rohan has suggested. So then who contributed to this LA smog? Now remember, we have covered environmental conservation history, we have covered a bit of social ethics, we've covered evolution of environmental systems and movements, and now we're moving into socio-ethics of environment with a bit of international relations. That's what I'm going to be covering. So as Kajal and Rohan say, Rohan has private messaged me, that's why you guys cannot see it. These people were not the only ones contributing to the LA smog situation. This smog is the result of generations of pollution gradually building up to this level, right? So the question is, if it wasn't the generation living through the 60s and the 70s, the people on your screen that was to be blamed for the LA smog, if they weren't solely responsible for it, should they have solely paid for it? It is cumulative contribution, right? So if they weren't the only ones contributing to it, should they have been the only ones paying for it? And this brings us to today. This brings us to COP26 in Glasgow and COP21 in Paris and 1992 Rio Declaration and 1989 Montreal Protocol and everything that's going to happen in your lifetimes and mine and everything that's happened before this at international negotiations. So what I've just explained to you in this slide, who has contributed and who has paid, is exactly what's happening in international negotiations today. How do you, how do I mean? You are asking me, how does this play out? An America or a developed nation says that cut down your global carbon emissions, right? An India or a China or any other developing Indonesia, any other developing nation says that, listen, you have made your money industrializing yourself since the 1700s. Now this is our age to industrialize ourselves. Why are you stopping us, right? So why should I have to pay for the cleanup when you have been the one polluting for the past 300 years? So it's the same slide conundrum, the conundrum on this slide, playing out at the international level. And I assure you, I've spoken with people who've drafted the Paris Agreement, and they've told me that this is the basic point of contention, even today in all the international negotiations, that why should I stop polluting when you have polluted already and made merry and money, and you owe your development to all the exploitation and pollution that have happened in so many years.
Sorry to interrupt, Professor.
Yeah, go ahead.
The discussion seems very relevant. However, something that is missing from it, I'll try to make one point is, there is one proverb that we should take care of things when it is in the precautionary phase rather than the cure phase. So whatever we are paying, whichever generation is paying, the statement that you said, why should we pay? But we are just more importantly, we are just trying for symptomatic cure. So this pollution thing is not an act. It's not an act. What I believe is, it is the in this world, in the real world, everything is cumulative. So that this generation didn't make the pollution, definitely, but the pollution is not an act that somebody does. It is the result of habits, or let's say wrong habits. for generations, and nobody can pay up for that. It should be handled in not a symptomatic way, but
So it's
the
a
root
very
cause
good
way.
point. Right. You're saying that precaution is better than cure. You're saying that instead of concentrating on disaster management, you should concentrate on infrastructure preparedness so that you can avoid the disaster in the first place.
That is not the idea, sir.
Okay.
I'm really saying that this should be thought of as habits, as habits,
Correct.
cumulative result of cumulative habits, and nobody can rectify cumulative habits in one generation. So what I mean to say is, if you put a penalty and light on an engine, that is not a solution. That is just trying to plug up the blunder.
Right.
So my idea is these treaties and these things are not going to help unless and until the habits, the lavish utilization of resources, the most impacting habit is this one, lavish utilization of available resources. That is not checked.
That's an excellent point. So it requires a systemic review of how we lead our lives in the first place, and start with behavioral changes and conscious changes and so on and so forth. Like people flying to COP26 to Glasgow, taking 15, 16-hour flights from East Coast and West Coast, and realizing that they're talking about how climate should be saved. So that's an excellent point. And I do agree. It requires awareness, education, sensitization, consciousness building, better business decisions, economics of how profits should reflect how green you are, so on and so forth. Again, I think Rohit is sort of reciprocating our points. So, as I was coming to the concept of international relations and how there's this concept called common but differentiated responsibility, CBDR. And CBDR was an earth-shattering decision at 1992 because the global north, the developed countries, agreed that they have contributed to causing the environmental disaster that we're in. They did not admit to it in these many words, but they said that they have put certain pressures on environment, global environment, and hence they should pay to the extent possible. Now, this is the conversation that's happening every day in international relations. You made the environment what it is, and you should pay for it. And other people say that you are polluting so much, and while you might not have polluted over the past 350 years, over the last 50 years, you've become the largest polluter, so you should pay for it, so on and so forth. That's the kind of discussion that's happening in IR. Now, I cannot delve too much into this because I'm short on time. I'd request all of you to, I'm putting the website, I'd request all of you to get in touch with us, and I'm happy to discuss this even further over otherwise. But let's move forward. So if you and your generation who's cleaning up, and Surya, I take your point, but I'm taking a philosophical route now to make understand a larger point. If your generation did not cause the climate change crisis that we're in, and you want people who did to pay for it, then how do you do that? Now, there's one concept called beneficiary pays principle, and it is generally understood that the countries that are significantly richer than the developing countries, the countries that are absolutely developed in today's age, have developed as one of the primary aspects of their development, or on account of exploiting their natural resources and natural resources of other countries. So you might come to India and you might cut the forest and build a railway line. Technically, you have contributed to development, but you have cleared one whole forest, or you've taken off the Aravalli range so that you could make constructions there, right? For those of you who are from the National Capital Region. Now, the two views that are at play within this beneficiary pays principle, that people who have benefited from it, people who are richer on account of the pollution, should pay for it. One view is the communitarian view, the conservative view. And this view says that even if it were your ancestors, your country in 1920s that had exploited the environment because of which you're benefiting today, you should be paying for cleaning up the environment, right? So if let's say that Akash here has an exact clone of himself who was born and brought up in London, right? And Akash, let's call him Akash ABC. So Akash here and Akash ABC are intellectually, educationally, financially, family-wise, relationship-wise, everything is exactly the same for Akash Deshmukh and Akash ABC. But one day, so Akash ABC is the exact clone of Akash Deshmukh, even in external factors. One day, Akash Deshmukh and Akash ABC falls sick. Akash ABC falls sick in London, Akash Deshmukh falls sick in India. Now, Akash Deshmukh takes 3 days to get better. Akash ABC takes 2 days to get better, or 1 day to get better. The public health system infrastructure is better in London. There's the NHS. He does not have to pay anything out of his own pocket at that point in time. Akash Deshmukh here has to finance his treatment, has to check with doctors and a lot of back and forth. And finally, he gets better in 3, 4, 5 days. Now, given the fact that Akash Deshmukh and Akash ABC are exactly the same for all intents and purposes, intellectually, educationally, professionally, family, finance, everything's exactly the same. Why does Akash Deshmukh have to suffer for 2 extra days or 3 extra days? And on the other hand, the flip side of the question is, the corollary is, why does Akash ABC benefit or have better standards just on account of being from a certain city in the developed world, right? And that's the question that the communitarians ask. Communitarian view basically says that Akash ABC did not earn the right to be there. In fact, he is there. He is better placed than Akash Deshmukh because his ancestors or his country in the past polluted, exploited environment, cut down forests for the whole globe to suffer. And hence, Akash ABC has a duty to Akash Deshmukh or the developing world generally. I'm just making it simpler for all of us to understand. Akash ABC has a duty towards the developing world to pay for climate action. Okay. That's the communitarian view. That's what Edmund Burke and Eric Neumayer and Axel Gossery, sorry, that's Axel, not Alex. Axel Gossery's talk about in their writings. And they have different concepts. Sorry, Edmund Burke had the larger concept of nationhood, which was adapted to the communitarian view. But Professor Neumayer and Gossery's talk about this in various principles that they've adapted to explain this. Now, there's the opposite view as well. And I'm going to ask all of you where you stand, which side of the fence do you fall on? You could say 1 for communitarian, 2 for axiological. I'm going to explain what axiological view is. Now, Professor Simon Caney of Oxford has said that Akash ABC, who's better placed than Akash Deshmukh, I'm oversimplifying and putting it in my own terms to help you understand the example. Akash ABC had no control over the actions of his nation in the 1700s or 1800s, or no control over the actions of his ancestors who ended up polluting and exploiting the environment. So why should Akash ABC be held liable to, make good the harm that was caused by his ancestors or his nation back in the day? And hence you should only connect the act of pollution to the actual polluter and not someone who had no control over that pollution. And that's what the individualistic view is, the axiological view is. So one view says that just because you exist and you have benefits that you reap on account of the various environmental exploitation, pollution that has been caused by your ancestors or your country or your citizenry, you should be held liable and you should pay the developing world in terms of technology and open source publications and open IP and so on and so forth, and energy investments and such. And axiological view says that, listen, you cannot connect today's generation to the generation of 500 years back, 300 years back, and they had no control over their actions. So how can you hold them responsible? Those are the two views that come within the international relations domain of environmental diplomacy. So just to recount, we've covered history, environmental history, we've covered environmental social ethics, we've covered environmental interventions, golden age of environment, and now we're into the IR bit of environment. So if communitarian is 1 and axiological is 2, communitarian is where you'll hold Akash ABC liable, and axiological is where you will not hold Akash ABC liable. I just want to check, where do you guys stand? Do you stand with 1 or do you stand with 2? If you could just quickly enter in the chat box whether you side with 1 or you side with 2. Okay. Okay, Ayush has messaged me saying 1. Zilla is 1. All right. Everyone seems to be 1. Pratham is 2. Good to know. Anyone else? 1, 2. Okay. A lot of 1s. So, guys, again, the point is not to give you my opinion. The point is not tell you that this is right, this is wrong, conservative is better or individualistic is better. The point is for you to think about how beneficiary pays principle plays out in real life and how international relations of environment works. And in my experience, the best way to understand it is by giving you the fodder and then making your own, you guys making up your own mind. So thank you. Understood. Now, I do not have the time to go into some of the most interesting principles of this concept. So again, I'd invite all of you to check out the website and write to me, and we can discuss this at a larger level. Now, irrespective of whether you're 1 or 2, there is a role to be played by current generations in the cleanup, environmental cleanup, I mean. And that comes through climate action. Remember, at the very beginning, I told all of you that I'm not going to be mentioning climate action in my slides because I want all of you to understand what is the basis of climate action in the first place. But there is a debt, and what complicates environmental issues, as some of you already know, I hope that your research is related to this, at least some of yours, is that valuation is a very big challenge in environment. Every couple of years, we see judgments of various courts which say that the cost of a tree, if you cut down a tree, it'll be 17,000 rupees or 35,000 rupees or 72,000 rupees. These are the costs that have been by various courts at different times. So how do you put a value to environment? And in the first place, is it okay to put a value on environment? And that's what we'll be discussing now. So after environmental diplomacy, we're now entering the realm of economics of environment. And I'm very aware that I have about 25 minutes left, so I'm going to sort of rush through it. And again, I have made my contact available on the chat box, so please feel free to reach out to me. It'll be best if you reach out to me through the website. Okay. let's say that we put all of this socio-ethical international diplomacy bit aside. Let's say that we're not playing a blame game anymore. We're not saying that ancestors polluted or nations polluted 200 years back, and we're not going into the ethics of it. Then if that moral argument is taken out of the picture, what's stopping the global north to give global south the resources for climate action? What's that one thing outside of morality and ethics and blame game that's stopping the global north from paying the global south? Oversimplification, but you get the gist of what I'm trying to get. Well, that one thing there's scarcity of is money. Exactly, Ashish. So the economics of it, the money of it. So let's deep dive into how economics of environmental law, policy management, and most importantly, climate action works, and the valuation conundrum of climate action. And I know that this is gonna confuse you, that why am I talking about glass skyscrapers when I'm talking about economics of climate action, but it'll make sense. So please bear with me for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and it'll all make sense. If any of you have been to London, you'd probably recognize these two buildings. Or if any of you have been fans of Sherlock, you'll certainly recognize this building. It's called the Bullet Building. This one, the third from the left. The first from the left is called the Walkie-Talkie Building. I'm taking this Walkie-Talkie Building as an example to explain the next set of arguments that I'm explaining. Guys, just give me a minute. I'm back in 60 seconds. Give me. All right, sorry about that. Perks of working from home. As I was saying, so the example that I'm going to take off is this building on the left called the Walkie-Talkie Building. Now, personally, I do not find it aesthetically very pleasing. I don't think it's like the grandest design of it all. But it's, believe it or not, at one point in time, it was the most expensive real estate in the world. It's one of the most iconic buildings in central London. If you've been to London, you have seen this building, and it is called the Walkie-Talkie Building because it looks a little like the walkie-talkie. So that's the background, the most expensive real estate in the world at one point in time. Now, there was a news report in CNN, I think, a couple of years back, that read this. There was a Jaguar XJ parked across the street from the Walkie-Talkie Building. And the light reflected off the Walkie-Talkie Building melted the Jaguar XJ partially. So I've quoted it from the news article itself. Reflected sunlight from London skyscraper melts the car. And I find this to be statistically funny, if I may. The owner of the car told the news agency, it's absolutely ruined. That's about it. Nothing more, nothing less. But it got me thinking, all of us know what greenhouse effect is. I hope some of you are into gardening. I'm massively into gardening, and greenhouse effect is basically when you stay in extreme winter conditions, you sort of build a glass house, and the glass captures the heat, and because of which plants have a higher temperature to grow in. Now these glass skyscrapers reflect enough light to melt a car. Imagine how much heat are they observing within this skyscraper of a greenhouse. And when I looked into it, turned out to be true. Here's a quote from an employee in one of these glass skyscrapers. We build a glass skyscraper, then we have to cool that glass skyscraper, right? It needs to be cooled because the heat outside. Now, cooling requires energy. So we consume more energy, which means that there's a demand for more energy and more fossil fuels are used, so on and so forth. And when more fossil fuels are used, it further creates heat, and climate change contributes to climate change further. And so it becomes a vicious cycle. So we build a glass skyscraper, then have to cool that glass skyscraper, which uses energy, which contributes to the climate crisis, which increases the temperature. The hotter the weather makes the glass building even harder to cool. And when we have to keep cooling it because sweaty co-workers are not happy co-workers, and so the cycle goes on. So the next time you have a look at the Manhattan skyline, think of the amount of energy that is being used to cool those wonderful glass skyscrapers, or Singapore skyline, or Hong Kong skyline, whichever you want to. But that leads me to a larger question. Why have vertical spaces in the first place? Why have skyscrapers in the first place? So we've understood that glass skyscrapers are, while the skylines look aesthetically very pleasing, they're not good for the environment. So why have it in the first place? And the answer is, for those of us who've read the Sapiens, you know this, but congregations occur and so on and so forth. And scarcity of space, infinite demand for land in, say, a Mumbai, right? If you're anyone from Mumbai here, please raise your hands. Anyone from Mumbai in this room? Okay. Zil knows what I'm talking about. There's scarcity of space, and there's a lot of demand for from everyone from South Bombay to Mathiran and Pune and Ahmednagar to stay in Bombay. Everyone wants to stay in Mumbai, right? So scarcity, what does it do? It when there's a scarcity of a product and a huge demand, the price goes up, right? The best you can do is build one house atop another, atop another, atop another, and that's how you have vertical spaces. And I'm sort of rushing through this, but I'm assuming you all get the logic of why we have vertical buildings and skyscrapers. Before I move into how valuation is a challenge in climate action, let me introduce a very small concept of urban planning and land laws, which might be helpful for you to understand. So there are two concepts. I'm just going to stick with FSI, floor space index. Anyone know what floor area ratio or floor space index is? Okay, let me explain it to you. So say that this is the piece of land you own. Okay, this paper is the piece of land you own. And this hypothetically is 1 square meter, okay, hypothetically. So you own 1 square meter of land, Now your master plan of the city or master plan of your region says that the FAR in your locality, the FSI, FAR, you could use either, floor area ratio, is 2. Okay. Which means that if you have a plot of land that is 1 square meter, and if your FSI is 2, then you could have a built up area. You can build construction equivalent to 2 into your total land area. So FSI is basically your ratio of the built up area with the land that you have, right? So if your built up, if your FSI is 1, you can have 1 square meter of construction over this. If your FAR is 2, you can have 2 square meter of construction. If it is 15, you can have 15 square meters worth of built up area over this 1 square meter of land, right? Simple. Now you can choose to arrange it however. So if your FSI is 1, which means that on this 1 square meter of land, you can have 1 square meter of built up area. You can cover all of the land with construction, or you can have half of the land free and you can have 2 floors of 0.5 and similarly 4 floors of 0.25, so on and so forth. So that's FAR, very basics of FAR. But the reason, and I know that all of you might have this question, so I'm explaining it to you, please bear with me. Let's look at the FAR, FSI map of major Indian cities. Okay, and I said I'm going to take Mumbai as an example due to paucity of time. So just quickly then, Ahmedabad is about 1.2, Bengaluru is anywhere between 1.75, 3.5, which means that if your land that you own is 1 square meters, then you can have 3.35 square meters of built up area over it, so on and so forth. I want you to look at Mumbai, the island city of Mumbai, not the all of greater Mumbai metropolitan area, just the island part of Mumbai. The FSI of Mumbai, the island part of Mumbai, is 1.33, which means that if you have 1 square meter of land, you can construct 1.33 square meters of built up area on it. Now, this is something that you should all make note of, because this is where the game hinges. All of us agree that Mumbai is one of the most prominent cities in the world, I hope, right? It is the economic capital of India, the city that never sleeps of India, so on and so forth, Bollywood. Now, let's compare Mumbai to similarly placed cities across the world. So financial capitals of various countries. Mumbai is 1.3 right here. And then you have Chennai and Nagpur below 5. But compare Mumbai to Hong Kong, 12, Chicago 12, New York 15, Singapore 23. I could not even fit it in my slide. That's how Mumbai compares to the major cities that are equivalent to Mumbai across the globe in terms of FAR. Which means that there's a lot less built up area you could construct in a Mumbai. You can only have, say, 5 floors or 10 floors versus 70 floors in a New York or Singapore, right? And there's a reason why that happens. There's a concept of carrying capacity of land and everything. I'm not going into that. I'm trying to make a very specific point here. Now we know that we've seen that Mumbai's FAR is 1.33. I want you all to guess, what are these two numbers? 48 square feet, 50 square feet. We're talking in terms of Mumbai, we're talking in terms of constrained spaces, we're talking how the FAR is low, which means that not many people can stay within the city because there can only be so much construction. So what could 48 square feet be? Any idea? Let's go with 48 square feet first.
Per head area that people receive in these cities.
Absolutely, absolutely. Anyone else wants to take a guess? All right, guys, I'm gonna move. Surya is absolutely right. That's exactly it. 48 square feet is the space available per person in the island city of Mumbai. Now, I want this to be put in perspective. A room area which is 7 feet by 7 feet in breadth and length is 49 square feet. So average space in Mumbai is less than 7 by 7. That's how constrained the space in Mumbai is. I hope, Zil, you're listening to this portion. Would anyone want to guess what 50 square feet is? Okay.
The square footage of these highly developed cities per person.
No, Surya. So this is very interesting. 48 square feet is the average floor space per person in the island city of Mumbai, as we saw. Island part of Mumbai. 50 square feet is the average floor space of a prison cell in the US, according to the federal regulations. So I just want you to breathe this in for a minute. Average floor space per person in Mumbai is less than the average floor space required for a prison cell, a federal prison cell in the US. And that's our financial capital. All right, but let's move on. What does it mean when you have a limited supply due to the low FSI, due to your urban policy, urban management planning policy? What happens when you have a limited supply of living spaces, but almost an infinite demand of those living spaces? Scarcity, high demand, short supply, high demand, basics of economics, short supply, high demand leads to price rise, right? So rents go up. What happens when rents go up? People who could not afford the rents congregate in slums, right? Now, not all of us want to stay in slums. Some of us have the resources to look. We cannot afford a place in the island part of Mumbai or South Bombay or Colaba or Fort. So what we do is we go to a Thane. We go to another suburb. We go to Mathiran. Pune, anyone from Pune here? Anyone from the city Pune? No. All right. So you go to suburbs such as Pune, Thane. I wouldn't have said Pune as an example if there was someone from Pune in the audience, because Punekers would like to think that Mumbai is a suburb to Pune. But anyway, so slums take place. For those of us who do not want to stay in slums but cannot afford a place in the island portion of Mumbai, go to suburbs like Thane and Mathiran and Pahalgarh, was it? I don't exactly remember. So on and so forth. So scarcity of space, limited supply of space, infinite demand of that space leads to higher rents, higher property valuation. That gives rise to slums. Palghar, sorry. Yes, Raji's right. All right, Chiranjit, it was a joke about Pune and Mumbai, sorry. So leads to an increase in prices of that property, real estate, which leads to people aggregating in slums. So slums increase and people want to stay in suburbs who do not want to stay in slums, and suburban sprawl increases. And once you have a suburban sprawl, for those of you who are from Delhi think about having to travel from Sonipat every day, or Meerut every day, or Bharatpur every day, or even Gurgaon and Greater Noida every day to central Delhi. When you're settled in a suburb, the first thing you require is transportation, public infrastructure transportation, right? So slums increase, suburban sprawl increases, transportation increases, so on and so forth. Now, what is common between these three? Slums, suburban sprawls, transportation. All three of them have major environmental impacts. Now, remember, we are seeing all of this as with Mumbai as an example, in terms of an urban policy of floor space index that not many of us have heard of or haven't looked up or haven't researched on. At least majority of us, I think, would not have researched on this. But all of these are impacts, either primary or secondary or tertiary, of that urban policy that some might argue is non-environmental. So it's not related to environment. But that policy in itself, a short policy of deciding the FAR of the island portion of Bombay, has these major environmental impacts. And I'm not going to take you through the exact valuation of this, of how it is having a massive environmental impact in terms of Mumbai, the slums, and the suburban sprawl, and transportation, both direct, indirect, and cumulative. But it is incredible the kind of environmental impact that non-environmental policies you cannot think would have a ripple effect on environment actually end up having. So it's a challenge to come up with a dollar figure to value the environmental impact of slums or environmental impact of having Palghar or Thane or Pune or any of those suburbs, or the transportation that you have to connect either through public transport, well and good, or if the government does not spend so much, then you are taking a car or carpooling every day or so on and so forth, which means that there's a lot of pressure that's put in the environment for or on account of or due to a policy that decided an FAR that you had no idea about. Extremely difficult to come up with the dollar figure for this, but let's say that you guys are adept at climate modeling and risk assessment and econometrics, and you come up with a valuation. You say that slums cause $50 billion worth of environmental impact every year, and suburbs and clearing the forest for suburbs cause $100 billion of environmental impact every year, and the pollution from transportation causes another $100 billion of environmental impact per year. All right, well and good. You have $250 billion of environmental impact on account of one urban policy deciding your FAR. But that's not the difficult part. I'm going to take you through 2 case studies very quickly in the next 3 minutes, 3-4 minutes, to make the point that I wanted to make. Now, this study was called The Impact of Indoor Climate on Human Cognition, Evidence from Chess Tournaments, a working paper. For those of you who are nerds like me and enjoy chess, there are 3 elements to a chess game: cognitive engagement, time sensitivity, and focus, right? Now, I'm not talking about, the game of chess that you play on your phone or you play with your cousin when there's no, in actual chess games and tournaments, if you've been a part of any, or if you watched any, you have to press the clock after every move you make, so on and so forth. So time is a factor. So every chess game has focus, cognitive engagement, and time sensitivity. That's just something that I wanted to put out there before I discuss the case study. So what these guys did, they went across chess tournaments across cities, and they drew observations on the impact of indoor pollution on the effectiveness of those chess players. Paper studied the impact of environmental quality on the performance of individuals undertaking cognitively demanding tasks under time pressure, as I mentioned. Now, these are the results. The results consistently indicated that pollution harms the player's performance in cognitive tasks. The estimation results showed that a 10 microgram per cubic meter increase in PM 2.5 levels resulted in a 1.5 percentage point increase in a probability of a player making a meaningful error with 9.4% larger errors. 10 microgram per cubic meter increase in PM 2.5 results in a 1.5 percentage point increase in probability of a player making a meaningful error with 9.4% larger errors. That's the impact on human cognition because of indoor pollution. Now, I completely understand if you're not a nerd like me, and if you're an extrovert, and if you're an outgoing person and you like outdoor sports, and chess is too indoory a sport or board game for you to be interested in, I have an example for you as well. Let's take this case study, which did the same study over baseball and baseball umpires. The study was called the study Air Quality and Air Quantity, Pollution and Performance in a High Skill Quality Focused Occupation. So there are a couple of similarities between a baseball umpire and a chess player. Both of them require focus, cognitive engagement, and time sensitivity. If any of you have followed a baseball game, you'd know that they're extremely under pressure all the time. Let's look at the results of this. The study found that 1 part per million increase in a 3-hour window of carbon monoxide causes an 11.5% increase in the propensity of umpires to make incorrect calls. 11.5% increase in the propensity of umpires to make incorrect calls, and a 10 microgram per cubic meter increase in a 12-hour PM 2.5 window causes 2.6% increase in incorrect calls. Now, you'd be fair in suggesting that you're neither an outdoor person nor an indoor person, you're just not a sports person, right? So you don't follow chess or baseball or cricket or football or hockey or any of those things. And I'd say that that's not the point of these case studies. The point of showing you these case studies is the takeaways are those 3 things that I kept mentioning: focus, cognitive engagement, time sensitivity. Think of all the professions that have these 3 things. We have established through these case studies that performance of individuals to make incorrect decisions increases if there is indoor pollution or outdoor pollution. So think of other professions that have these 3 factors: cognitive engagement, focus, time sensitivity. Any guesses? What are the other professions? Think of miners, right? Think of air traffic controllers, the ones who give directions to a plane. Think of stock market brokers, right? Handling billions of dollars over a call, the price goes up the next second, that person misses, the company comes crashing down. Think of surgeons, right? You have a patient on the operation table in front of you. You're under pressure, you're focused, you're cognitively engaged, there's time sensitivity, obviously. Think of all the professions that come along this trifecta of cognitive engagement. Now, and take students as an example. Students have to take 3-hour exams in an exam hall, and the indoor air pollution might be very high. And some student might feel that, listen, I swear I knew the answer to this question, but I'm absolutely blanking out. It does not always reflect, it does not always have to be because the student did not study or did not know. It could also be on account of the evidence that we've seen because of the indoor pollution or the outdoor pollution, right? So how do you value? You can value the environmental impact on because of slums or transportation or suburbs. How do you value the environmental impact on human cognition? How do you value a student going blank in an exam? Or let me give you a more substantive example. Say I am a surgeon. Okay, I'm not. But say I'm a surgeon, hypothetically, and I'm operating and I have all the skills and I have all the certificates and I have a reputation and I have 20 years experience. This is child's play for me. It's all muscle memory operating now. And due to the high indoor pollution, I make a mistake, right? Because of which it takes my patient another 3 months to recover fully. Now, in those 3 months, that patient could not work, which means that that patient incurred financial liability. And that patient sues me for medical negligence, right? She says that, I was earning 5 lakhs per month and I could not work. So 15 lakhs for loss of pay, another 25 lakhs for mental trauma, another 10 lakhs for moral turpitude, so on and so forth. The doctor should pay me 60 lakhs. And the court says that, this is a simple procedure and you did make an error. So there is medical negligence, obviously. And so pay up. Now I enter a plea and I say that, listen, you can look at my record and the video of my laparoscopic surgery, and you can look at all the certificates I hold and ask about my skill level through evidence. I am still the most skilled surgeon. The reason why I made an error was because our urban policy, urban management policy, our master plan for whatever city, says that the FAR is only 1.2 or 1.1, because of which there are a lot of slums in suburbs and transportation that has come up, because of which it has led to massive environmental pollution, including indoor air pollution, because of which my cognitive ability was affected, because of which I made the error, because of which the patient suffered a net loss of 60 lakhs. Now, because of all of this equation, it is actually the authority that framed the urban policy that led to the patient suffering a loss of 60 lakhs, and hence the government should be held liable and not me. Now, those are some of the valuation challenges that play out in climate action. That's why when you talk of climate action, you talk of climate mitigation, adaptation, you talk of environmental laws per se. You talk of having environmental standards for sulfur. You talk of having BOD, COD standards. You talk of having better healthcare for farm animals and so on and so forth, and lesser distillery units or tanneries. But the fact of the matter is that valuation of climate action is not only dependent on environmental factors. Non-environmental factors can have as much environmental impacts, as we saw through the example of this urban development master plan policy of floor area ratio. So that's my session today, guys. I hope you guys got to learn something, or at least there was enough curiosity for you to want to explore this topic further. If there are any questions, I know we're way out of time, about 10 minutes out of time, and you guys deserve at least a 20-minute break. So I'm not going to implore all of you to ask any questions, but you can write to us at info@gpos.org. I'll request my colleague Srishti to enter all the details of my details, and you can get in touch with me. I would really appreciate it if you could give your feedback at some point of time, either through email or through any other means. And again, I want to thank Dr. Malik and Dr. Sharma and Dr. Kirpan for giving us this opportunity, and we await your engagement in the next session to be starting in 19 minutes.
Professor,
Thank you.
I had one thing to say.
Yeah.
I had just one simple thing to say, that
Yes.
whatever you're saying seems very correct at this moment. However, all your approaches are business centric and not
Right.
people centric. Whatever you explained, it seemed like there's a bias in these policies
Right.
for being business centric.
Right.
See, why do I need to go to Mumbai? I should be able to earn my livelihood at any place in this
Absolutely.
world. And there is no constraint of Mumbai. The constraint we have imposed, the business industry has imposed. So industry centric solutions should be the last.
Absolutely. It should not form the basis of all of our policy interventions. I completely agree, Surya. I'd invite you to let's have a chat, because I had to cut this session short. But if you take the series of my lectures, that's actually the point that I make in my third or fourth lecture, that our whole approach has to be non-business centric and human centric and social centric. So you have absolutely no argument or challenge from my end. I completely agree.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Chaturvedi. Now let's have a break for 15-20 minutes or so.
Right.
And we'll be back by 4:25.
Right. 4:25 should be fine, sir. We'll have a small video lined up for all the students.
And I would like to request Srishti or Aditi, somebody, to make some kind of a feedback for participants.
Right.
I mean, if we can generate that feedback, then it will also contribute to public policy framing, right?
We'll certainly, Dr. Malik. It's an excellent suggestion. Let us prepare a feedback form and circulate it within all the participants in the next hour or so.
Yeah. I mean, after let them be given 2 to 3 days or so.
Absolutely.
To think about this, to think in and through a problem, and then come up with this.
Yes, absolutely.
Suggestions. Yeah. Okay. Then
all right. Thank you so much, Dr. Malik, and we'll see
so much.
All of you in.
And we look forward to hearing from Professor Arpit Chaturvedi in another 15-20 minutes. Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Eeshan Chaturvedi.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, guys. All right. Bye.